my fellow Americans.
I can no longer remain in today's Democratic Party that's under the complete control of an elitist cabal of warmongers who are driven by cowardly wokeness, who divide us by racializing every issue and stoking anti-white racism, who actively work to undermine our God-given freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution, who are hostile to people of faith and spirituality, who demonize the police but protect criminals at the expense of law-abiding Americans, who believe in open borders, who weaponize the national security state to go after their political opponents, and above all, who are dragging us ever closer to nuclear war. Now, I believe in a government that's of the people, by the people, and for the people. Unfortunately, today's Democratic Party does not. Instead, it stands for a government that is of, by, and for the powerful elite. Now, I'm calling on my fellow common sense, independent-minded Democrats to join me in leaving the Democratic Party. If you can no longer stomach the direction that the so-called woke Democratic Party ideologues are taking our country, then I invite you to join me.
The Vietnam War and the push for US involvement was a result of the Gulf of Tonkin incident. A lie. The Iraq War famously is a result of lies. Wars in Somalia are a result of lies. The Second World War and the German invasion of Poland was a result of carefully constructed lies. That is war by media. Let us ask ourselves, of the complicit media, which is the majority of the mainstream press, what is the average death count attributed to each journalist?
Let me ask you a question. Do you think you should be the one to be able to decide when to pull the trigger?
No, sir.
Isn't that what this is about? If you adopt the position that any time you are denied, your particular, and there's 4 groups out there, and inspectors, you're the group you headed, anytime you are denied, that ipso facto requires the United States and the Security Council to act on what they said they would do, which is to use whatever means necessary to take on Saddam Hussein so you can get into that particular facility. Is that not correct? Is that not your position?
Mr. Senator, I have a job to do, or I had a job to do, and that was to disarm Iraq in accordance with the provisions of relevant resolutions.
With all due respect, I'm not trying to be confrontational. I'm trying to get this as clear as I can. I really mean this now. You have an absolute logic. You put together a very tight syllogism here. You have indicated that your job is to disarm. The only way you can disarm is to have access. The only way you can have access is either with permission on the part of Iraq, or if denied, forced access, right?
Compelled access.
Compelled.
Yes.
Well, okay, compelled. You sound like the lawyer and I sound like the military guy. I mean, compelled, where I come from, when my old man said you're compelled, it meant I was forced. I mean, it was a real simple proposition. It wasn't much to debate. Now, there is a clear logic to that. And that's what I mean when I say I respect your position. But that means that whenever you choose a target that warrants inspection and you are denied, that ipso facto, at that moment, the only way your position can be satisfied or sustained is if the UN Security Council or the United States, acting unilaterally, uses force to guarantee access. Is not that true?
Yes, sir.
Now, that means that you get to choose the time and place when we would use force, if we use force.
No, sir.
Of course you do. If you choose the site and it's denied.
And we coordinate with the member states to include the United States.
Exactly.
And prior to us going in, we have their agreement that this indeed is an inspection worth doing.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the president now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the majors. The majors' assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the president have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone, or to take the nation to war partway, or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip, because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector. You didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in, so what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Scott, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, they get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
Rationality belongs to the cool observers, but because of the stupidity of the average man, he follows not reason but faith, and the naive faith of the proletarian requires necessary illusion and emotionally potent oversimplifications, which have to be provided by myth-makers to keep the ordinary person on the right course.
That I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the press gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary, hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed 1 million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war.
George,
after
if
what
I
you've
was
already
still in
done.
Parliament...
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons and the capability to rapidly produce more, many more. And he has the ability to dispense these lethal poisons and diseases in ways that can cause massive death and destruction. If biological weapons seem too terrible to contemplate, chemical weapons are equally chilling. UNMOVIC already laid out much of this, and it is documented for all of us to read in UNSCOM's 1999 report on the subject. If we consider just one category of missing weaponry, 6,500 bombs from the Iran-Iraq war, UNMOVIC says the amount of chemical agent in them would be in the order of 1,000 tons. These quantities of chemical weapons are now unaccounted for. Dr. Blick says, quipped that, quote, mustard gas is not marmalade. You are supposed to know what you did with it. We believe Saddam Hussein knows what he did with it, and he has not come clean with the international community. We have evidence these weapons existed. What we don't have is evidence from Iraq that they have been destroyed or where they are. That is what we are still waiting for.
Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function. Let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans, right. You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about. Okay, you get NIH, one person.
Let's read from the NIH definition of gain of function. This is your definition that you guys wrote. It says that scientific research that increases the transmissibility among mammals is gain of function. They took animal viruses that only occur in animals and they increased their transmissibility to humans. How you can say that is not gain of function?
It is not.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this because you're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
And let's Dr. Fauci.
I have to, well, now you're getting into something. If the point that you are making is that the grant that was funded as a sub-award from EcoHealth to Wuhan created SARS-CoV-2. That's where you are getting. Let me finish.
We don't know.
Well, wait a minute.
It didn't come from the lab, but all the evidence is pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself.
I totally
This committee will allow the witness to respond.
I totally resent the lie that you are now propagating, Senator, because if you look at the viruses that were used in the experiments, that were given in the annual reports, that were published in the literature, it is molecularly impossible.
No one's saying those viruses caused it.
It is molecularly.
Those viruses caused the pandemic. What we're alleging is that gain-of-function research was going on in that lab, and NIH funded it.
That is
not. You can't
not.
get away from it. It meets your definition, and you are obfuscating the truth.
I'm not obfuscating the truth.
Senator
You are the
Paul's
one.
time is expired, but I will allow the witness to.
Let me just finish. I want everyone to understand that if you look at those viruses, and that's judged by qualified virologists and evolutionary biologists, those viruses are molecularly impossible to result in SARS-CoV-2.
Those viruses caused the pandemic. We're saying they are gain-of-function viruses because they were animal viruses that became more transmissible and human, and you funded it. And you admit the truth. And you implying...
Senator Paul, your time has expired, and I will allow witnesses who come before this committee to respond.
And you are implying that what we did was responsible for the deaths of individuals. I totally resent that. And if anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome, everybody, to Redacted on this Wednesday. So glad to have you here. I'm Clayton Morris. Natali is might be with us in a minute. We'll see. But you've got me right now, solo. So welcome into the big show on this Wednesday. This is the show where we seek the truth, no matter where it takes us. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hope everyone is doing well. Coming up on the big show on this Wednesday, we've got Putin versus NATO. So the big offensive looks like it's about to unfold between Vladimir Putin, the Russian army, and of course the rest of what's left of Ukraine. So there are a number of reports this afternoon about a mounting offensive. We're going to go through all of this. Former UN Weapons Inspector Scott Ritter is going to be joining us to dive deeper into some of these big moves around NATO and what Henry Kissinger had to say about Ukraine joining NATO. So a lot of moving pieces on that this afternoon. Plus, we're going to look at Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. The governor of Florida has now dropped a bombshell and is moving pretty straightforward against Big Pharma and the biopharmaceutical complex. So we're going to be looking at that tonight. We're also going to be talking about Greta Thunberg, who, of course, was arrested in air quotes. But there's a larger question about, like, what are these elites trying to accomplish with their climate theater that is going on when all signs are pointing to a climate hoax? Seeing the Great Barrier Reef back in full force. The polar bears are back. So there's all of this talk, of course, about emissions and getting to net carbon zero. But what will that actually do to the average human beings, people that, you know, need fossil fuels, need hydrocarbons to live their lives, while these elites can fly around in private jets? So we'll dive deeper into that. We've got a special guest on that. So all of that and more on this Wednesday as Redacted starts right now. Rob Thompson in our chat says, Greta, not arrested, just carried around for fun. Yeah. Well, it was like how the mainstream media plays that story, of course, which is like, Greta Thunberg, climate activist, arrested at a coal mine. Really? No, okay. We'll show you the videotape. You be the judge of that arrest and see how well it went, that photo opportunity. But we've got a very busy show for you. Thank you guys all for subscribing, being a part of our great community here. You know, there's been a lot of discussion over the past 24 hours about independent media and how independent they really are. And Steven Crowder, of course, talking about some of those, I don't know, conservative media networks, I guess, that, you know, it's funny. I kind of operate outside of that stuff. I don't really pay much attention to all of that. And since I left the mainstream media a number of years ago, I don't answer to anybody. We don't answer to any of these billionaires. We have no big media partnerships with anybody. So it's kind of funny. It's very odd. I'm blessed that we get to do this show with your support, by you subscribing and being a part of our community here. We do this show for you. And if you weren't here, then we wouldn't do the show. It's that simple. But it's been interesting. And so, again, thank you for supporting independent journalism. Thank you for subscribing, whether on YouTube or Rumble, and being a part of our great community. We also have a free daily newsletter that was a little bit late today, and I apologize for that. We had a server issue. It's a free newsletter, but so many of you wrote to us today and said, hey, I usually start my morning with your newsletter. Where is it? I'm having my cup of coffee. Where is it? Where is it? So we apologize. There was a server issue and it got hung up and didn't send out like it should have. So it was about 2.5 hours to 3 hours late. So I apologize. But anyway, it is free. It's a lot of fun. You can read it in about 5 or 10 minutes over your cup of coffee just by signing up. Go to redacted.inc is the place to go. Redacted.inc. Put in your email address and you'll receive a welcome email. And when you get that welcome email, you just need to verify it. And then tomorrow morning, we hope at 6:30 a.m. Eastern time is usually when we try to publish the newsletter. So if you're in Australia, then I guess you're reading it late at night. But nevertheless, you'll have it when you want to enjoy it. So again, redacted.inc is the place to go. We also have a community. So you can support independent journalism by going to the community button there on redacted.inc. And for the price of a cup of coffee, you can support what we do here. We have exclusive content that is released to you privately. So just for the community. And if you're on Rumble, you can click that big red join button, and that's how you can join our locals community. Again, for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support independent journalism so that we don't have to answer to any of those billionaires. Again, redacted.inc. Well, the war in Ukraine is taking center stage at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. A lot of big news emerging over the past 24 hours. The first of which is 99-year-old Henry Kissinger. They rolled him out on stage, and he now says that Ukraine should join NATO. That's, of course, a big flip-flop on his previous position that Ukraine should negotiate peace and give up land, give up the Donbass. Well, that's concerning. And then we heard from Finland's prime minister that Putin is irrelevant, and the only way for this to end is for Ukraine to win and also retake land. Listen.
We don't know when the war will end, but we have to make sure that it will end. Ukrainians win. I don't think that there's any other choice. If Russia would win the war, then we would only see decades of this kind of behavior ahead of us. I think other countries are looking very closely what is happening now in Ukraine. And if Russia would win, then it would send a message that you can invade another country, you can attack another country, and you can gain from that. We don't.
So if that's not enough, they seem to be on the same page that Ukraine has to retake its land here, all of these elites. The United States and its allies are set to increase the amount of weapons that we're sending to Ukraine. Joining us now is former UN Weapons Inspector, United States, and former U.S. Marine, Scott Ritter. Scott, welcome back to the show. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with NATO. Let's start with that point from Henry Kissinger, who a lot of people made a lot of noise about 7 months ago, when he came out and said, no, like they should negotiate peace, give up 20% of their land, be done with it, because otherwise they'll be basically eliminated as a country. Why the flip-flop, do you think, on this major point?
Well, I think only Henry Kissinger can answer that question fully, but we need to understand that, he is the name attached to a major business, Kissinger and Associates, which provides advisory and analysis support to big clients, including governments and businesses, et cetera. There's an old adage in the military that I always was reminded of when I was standing in front of senior officers explaining why what I did was right. They said, Ritter, when you're explaining, you're losing. And, Kissinger made a statement 8 months ago that was closer to being right than wrong, that Ukraine can never be a member of NATO, that process is inherently destabilizing. But the end result was a backlash that I believe hit the bottom line of his core business and business interests. Remember, he's speaking at the World Economic Forum, so it's the bottom line that matters. And for Henry Kissinger, he's no longer in the business of directly impacting national security. He's not the national security advisor. He's not the Secretary of State. He's a former, who has significant baggage. I mean, there's a significant part of the world that reviles this man, condemns him as a war criminal, et cetera. So his existence is contingent upon his ability to continue to attract attention from the establishment. And his statements that were made last summer put him at odds with the establishment. So I think, because this is incoherent. I mean, to be frank, his statement is fundamentally incoherent. It makes no sense, except when seen in the larger context of similar incoherence coming out of Europe, NATO, and the United States about this conflict in Ukraine. So he, rather than being right, has opted to be wrong, but be wrong in the right way when it comes to his economic interests. I don't think there's any real, analytical gift being brought here. This is pure selfish economic interests.
Right. And he's absolutely in a line with the other globalists and the other elites who were speaking at Davos. We heard from Ursula von der Leyen also coming out saying that we need to support Ukraine as much as possible, throw as much money and weapons there. The United States also echoing those sentiments over the past 24 hours. And then you have the Finnish prime minister also saying the very same thing. Your response to what she said about Putin is now irrelevant, and that Ukraine needs to retake its land, and that's the only way that this ends.
I don't mean to be too cute here, too flippant, but there's really no other response, because they're not serious people. I mean, they hold serious positions, but what they're saying is so far removed from reality, so far detached from what's actually going on and what's actually going to happen, that you have no choice but to, get a little cute when they respond. To me, what's happening here is a gathering of the Titanic captain and crew after they hit the iceberg, saying the iceberg is not relevant. We're going to make it to New York, all speed ahead. Meanwhile, water's coming in, the ship's sinking, and they're just saying, nope, keep on going, keep on going. That iceberg is irrelevant. No, I'm sorry, crew. The iceberg done won. And I'm sorry for all the people in Davos. Russia done won. It's game, set, match. Now, you can prolong the suffering of Ukraine, and that's all that's happening right now. The goal of, that was stated by Lloyd Austin and others last April, May, that the goal, and they were sort of honest back then, the goal wasn't for Ukraine to win. The goal was to inflict pain on Russia. I mean, right, that alone should have caused every Ukrainian to go, what, wait a minute? It's just another bit of irony. I was singled out by the Center for Countering Disinformation, Zelensky's private little intellectual hit unit, for being an international terrorist and a war criminal and a Russian propagandist for daring to say what I say. The number one thing that I was accused of was, they listed three main things, but the first one was that I had the gall to say that this was a proxy conflict between NATO and Russia. Well, the Ukrainian defense minister just came out and said the exact same thing. So I'm looking forward to his name appearing next to mine, just like I'm looking forward I don't have to look forward. It is Arestovich, the former advisor to Zelensky, is now on the Miratov's hit list. So he and I are now partners. Me and the defense minister are partners. It seems that everybody's gravitating towards the stance that I've taken, and they're all appearing on the same list. But, besides being cute and coy about this, the point is this has always been a proxy conflict. It has never been about Ukraine winning. So why are people suddenly now, at this late stage in the game, trying to convince people that there's a new reality, a new outcome, a new direction being taken policy-wise, when the truth is this is a proxy conflict between NATO and Ukraine, or NATO and Russia, where the Ukrainians will pay the price. NATO and the United States are prepared to sacrifice the Ukrainian nation and the Ukrainian state for the sole objective of weakening Russia, and they have failed. They have failed economically. Russia, 28% growth in its, in the income derived from energy. They were looking at, they were expecting, 15% drop in GDP, 2% drop. Remember, the entire Western world that Russia was fundamentally linked to has sanctioned Russia, broke Russia off. This should have been a precipitous collapse in the Russian economy. Instead, a 2% reduction in GDP, 28% growth in the income derived from energy sales. Inflation is literally a third of that of Europe, The Russian economy is firing on all cylinders going forward, not just firing on all cylinders, but firing on cylinders in a way that not only sustains civilian economic growth, but they've expanded defense industry production. They are on a wartime footing right now, not only to sustain and support the special military operation, but to grow the Russian military over the next 3 years to 1.5 million men, primarily through contract services. I mean, professional soldiers, an increase in divisions, 10 division equivalents being created, whole new army formations, etc. Meanwhile, NATO is still struggling whether or not they can get those pathetic battalion-sized battle groups in the Baltics up to brigade strength. They don't have the funding for it. They don't have the decision-making. Russia is so far ahead of them in terms of strategic thinking, and we haven't even gotten to what's going on in the SMO. 300,000 troops finalizing their mobilization, equipped with the most modern equipment, ready to go right now on the battlefield. Meanwhile, England is celebrating that they made the courageous decision to provide 14 Challenger 2 tanks, and they're now talking about bringing in Warrior armored vehicles to work side by side with Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, as if technology makes a thing. At the end of the day, it's the quality of the soldier, the quality of the soldier's training, the quality of the leadership, the quality of the staff planning. Russia owns all of those sectors. The Ukrainians are a defeated nation, a defeated military. That's the ultimate outcome, and nothing anybody says at Davos is going to change.
Well said, well said. And, we've seen a couple of major moves over the past few days, obviously near the city of Bakhmut and the city of Soledar being collapsing now to Russian forces. Ukrainian volunteer soldiers coming out in interviews with the Times admitting that they were unprepared to fight the Russians. They said, we had a few Kalashnikov rifles and a few grenades, and that was it. We didn't have anything. We didn't have night vision goggles. We are not prepared to fight the Russians. And then, of course, you have this other report from CNN confirming what you had just said, which is that basically Ukraine is being used as a testing ground for weapons. Like, that's essentially what Ukraine is now. It's just a testing ground where these military industrial complex can now test these weapons against Russia. Is that really what the future of Ukraine is going to be? Basically one large testing ground?
No, that might be the present status of Ukraine. The future of Ukraine has been one large graveyard. I don't mean to be too grim here. This war's over. It's over. I mean, the only thing that's left is death and destruction. But, this is the equivalent. I keep trying to tell people, they're like, well, the war's not over. It's going to go on for a long time. Hey, dude, any analyst worth his or her salt would have told you in March 1943, after the fall of Stalingrad, that the momentum had permanently shifted over to the Soviet Union. But even if you had doubts about that, from September 44, after the Battle of Kursk, we now know that the Soviet Union is going to win. There's nearly another year's worth of fighting ahead, but there's no doubt about it. It's the same thing in, with the once the Allied forces ensconce themselves in Normandy, it's over. Germany can't win. There's still fighting to go. We're at the stage in the conflict right now where any strategic thinker worth his or her salt is looking at all the data, all the statistics, and realizing there's nothing that can be done to salvage Ukraine. Its economy is toast. Understand that. There is zero economic growth in Ukraine. It's all diminished. Its power, its infrastructure, gone. Even if the war stopped today, Ukraine is a hopeless train wreck that will continue to crash through into next year. This winter isn't the one Ukraine needs to worry about. It's next winter when everything shuts down. There is nothing left. So with no economy, so Ukraine is living on the largesse of the West. We keep them alive by pumping money in. I'm not talking about the military. I'm talking about the economy. And at some point in time, when Europe's economy starts to collapse on its own right, how can they continue to fund this? Is the United States, with a new Republican Congress, going to continue to throw tens of billions of dollars away when there's hurricane survivors down in Florida begging for assistance, when California is going through, flooding and storms right now that's going to need assistance? When are the American people going to say enough is enough? We aren't giving this failed regime any more money. It's all over but the shouting. Unfortunately, Ukraine has significant manpower resources that can continue to be mobilized and thrown into service, just like Nazi Germany did in the end, mobilizing the children and the old men. They kept up a fight for months longer than the war should have been fought. That's where Ukraine is right now. And it doesn't matter how much so-called equipment. I mean, what is CNN thinking? I mean, really, CNN? A testing ground for what? The Patriot? We know about the Patriot. It failed in 1991, it failed in 2003, and it failed recently in Saudi Arabia. It can't protect Saudi critical infrastructure from Houthi drone attacks. And suddenly solved all the problems, and we're going to take Ukrainian soldiers, train them in 5 months, and they become miraculous practitioners of air defense warfare with a weapon system they've never dealt with? No. We're going to give them the Challenger 2 tank. Let's say it is the tank touched by God. It is perfection of armor. It's not, by the way. But let's just say it is. 14 Challenger 2 tanks you're going to throw into the largest land combat scenario the world's seen since World War II, and they will have the life expectancy of nothing. They'll all be destroyed because 14 tanks in isolation means nothing. Oh, we're going to give them Bradleys and this. No, Zelensky said he needed 300 tanks, 500 infantry fighting vehicles, 500 artillery pieces, unlimited supply of ammunition. He's not getting anywhere close to this, and what he's getting are pieces of equipment that are from disparate sources. They all have unique maintenance problems, which creates sustainability issues. We're actually making Ukraine weaker by providing them this equipment than we would be if we just continued to provide them the old Soviet equipment that they know how to use. They know how to. The problem is there's no more Soviet equipment because we gave it to them all, and the Russians have destroyed it. The Russians are going to destroy this equipment too. Is it going to be cheap for Russia? No. They're going to suffer losses, but Russia will win.
That is the headline right there. We are making Ukraine weaker by giving them all of this disparate crap right now. Wow. I haven't thought of it in those terms, but that's why we have you on the show. Again, these globalists who continue to drive this country into oblivion are just, lining their pockets, making themselves wealthier. And as Russia said yesterday, it doesn't matter what you call these tanks. You want to call them tanks. You want to call them Bradley fighting vehicles. You want to call them Challenger. It doesn't matter what they are. The Russians said yesterday, they all burn the same. And
they're going to burn.
Yeah, unbelievable. Scott Ritter, always great to have you here on the show. Where can people follow? I know you've got stuff that you're doing on YouTube, of course, doing great content there as well. You're back on Twitter. Hallelujah. Where can people follow you?
Oh, I got kicked off of Twitter within 24 hours.
Oh,
crime unknown. I have a website. It's scottritterextra.com, and anything I write or any show that I've been on, for instance, when you send me a link, I'll go ahead and post it there so people can follow everything I'm doing there. And there's no paywall, so welcome to everybody. If you want to support, there's a mechanism to do that through Substack, but I don't. Maybe someday I'll learn how to monetize things, but for the moment, I'm still in the program that if you ask the question, I owe you an answer. So I'll do that. But as you know, nothing happens for free, and bills have to be paid. So anything, if people like it and they feel like they want to support it, there's a mechanism to do that too. But until then, it's free.
Well, we've got a large audience here, so our audience loves having you on. Please go support what Scott does, his great reporting, his great analysis. Go to scottritterextra.com and support through a Substack and subscribe. We'll have links to your work in our description below as well. So, Scott, great to see you. Happy New Year to you. Thanks so much for your analysis and joining us here on the show.
Well, thank you very much, and Happy New Year to you, and good luck going forward. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Man, I'm blown away. That to me is one of the most important points I've heard, maybe throughout this entire conflict, what he just said.
Well, the part about we're making them weaker by giving them disparate equipment that they don't know how to use. Well, and then we saw evidence of that over the weekend with the Dnepr apartment bombing, which now Russia is saying they should never have had anti-military craft in civilian areas. Now, neither side has been able to corroborate this, but we continue to see evidence of people getting hurt by using equipment they don't know how to use. This is not just like sending somebody a toaster and saying they'll probably figure it out and not die.
Well, even our toaster is hard to use. Like, I've tried to use our toaster on a regular basis, and I still don't know what some of the buttons do on that thing. Can you imagine?
I hate that steaming mechanism.
I know the steaming mechanism. Can you imagine getting like Patriot missile batteries that you have no like a year of training at least to be up into and they're just like sending all this random equipment, but we are, to his point, making them weaker by giving them all of this stuff, demanding the manpower that they don't have. I don't know. I think it's a remarkable statement. So our thanks to Scott for that. Really, really, really interesting.
Well, we're going to turn now to the fight in Florida against Big Pharma. That was a bit of an alliteration.
Flight in Florida about Big Pharma. The
fight in Florida about pharma, even though the last P is a PH. But first, we want to tell you about our friends over at ScoreMaster. Charging higher interest is how banks make more money. And they make a lot more of your hard-earned money. If your credit score is just okay or meh, but not great, you need your credit score to be great. That's why ScoreMaster is the new science in accelerating credit scores, and they put you in control of your money, not the bank. So say your credit is 650 and you're borrowing about $500,000 on a refinance on your home. Well, if you start at ScoreMaster, that could save you over $75,000 in interest over the life of your loan, plus time. It will save you a lot more time as well. That's time that you're not paying a mortgage. That $75,000 is yours, not the bank's. And that's the genius behind ScoreMaster's 3-week rule, especially now with soaring interest rates. We know now today, did you know Jerome Powell has COVID? He tested positive for COVID. Oh, I didn't know he had already had it.
I'm sure they
And he
all
says
have.
he's working from home, so he's probably working really hard on figuring out how high to raise those interest rates. So you need to get in on making sure that your credit score is ready to apply for any loan, any auto lease, or any credit. You start at ScoreMaster. Just visit scoremaster.com/redacted for your special 7-day trial. Again, your 7-day trial is waiting for you at scoremaster.com/redacted.
So we've got a lot more news to get to here on this Wednesday. We're going to be looking at the very latest in Florida. Governor DeSantis there going after the biopharmaceutical complex. We're also going to be looking at Greta and her quote-unquote arrest. Greta Thunberg and the climate activists. Ralph Schulhammer is going to be joining us to dive into the elite of the bourgeoisie. But first, I guess, let's go down to Florida, the Sunshine State.
Right. Well, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announced new legislation that would prohibit what he calls coercive biomedical policies. That's a nice way to put it. I kind of had to think about that for a second. Well, what does that mean? It means they can't stop you from doing something if you're not participating in what Michael Schellenberger calls COVIDism. And I kind of like that term. COVIDism, meaning you're all in on getting all the vaccines and making sure everyone else does and telling everybody to wear a mask and, being upset if people are not still behaving as if we're in the midst of the pandemic. Well, if you're not doing those things in some parts of the world, they still are punishing people, but no longer in Florida. DeSantis bill is called Prescribe Freedom. Here's a summary of it. It says that it will permanently prohibit COVID-19 mask requirements throughout the state. It will permanently prohibit COVID-19 vaccine mask requirements in all schools. It will also permanently prohibit COVID-19 vaccine passports in Florida, and also permanently prohibit employers from hiring or firing based on mRNA jabs. Okay, more of that down below. It also will prohibit discrimination based on COVID-19 vaccination status, remove two-tiered test and mask discrimination, and protect medical freedom for medical professionals, protect the rights to disagree with the preferred narrative of the medical community, and protect the religious views of medical professionals. Now, that's really interesting when you juxtapose it with California, which late last year passed the California Assembly Bill 2098, where doctors now can lose their license for saying anything that is deemed COVID misinformation. Well, of course, how do we define that? Here is the Assembly bill. It says that if you disseminate misinformation or disinformation as a physician related to COVID-19, including false or misleading, now misleading is something they can really hang something on here, right? Then that shall constitute unprofessional conduct, and they can take your license if you're a doctor. So let's imagine these two hypothetical scenarios. Two elderly people, both living in sunshine states, both have a history of stroke due to blood clots.
Okay.
And that kind of thing.
Yeah.
In Florida, that person goes to their doctor and says, hey, would you like to talk about getting vaccinated for COVID or getting a booster or what have you? And the doctor can say, well, there's new data showing certain risks, right? Would you like to explore said risks? And that person is free to explore those risks with their doctor. In California, however, a doctor may not want to present the patient with this risk factor. They may worry that, the CDC rules are still a certain way, and they will no longer have this discussion. Right? And which sunny state would you like to live in if you are elderly person with risk of, you don't even have to be elderly, if you are just a person with risk of stroke due to blood clots.
Right. Well, would you get fired? I mean, in California, we've certainly heard of that happening because of these laws, hospitals firing doctors for not adhering to hospital policy on COVID and CDC policy.
Right.
And they've lost their jobs for it.
Well, in California, given the fact that the CDC concluded with their investigation, which I encourage you to seek out our report on Rumble on said investigation, which is now, this is how you do an investigation, is you write a press release, that the CDC has concluded that there's no risks for, even though there was one of their reporting systems that flagged a risk. But are you allowed to say that? Who knows? And what doctor in California wants to risk their license for bringing this up? And so what? Then you just, what? So again, which sunny state are you going to choose if you'd like a real choice from your doctor?
Is for future, this sets a precedent for these doctors. It's like, okay, so this is one thing that they're doing that with, and now there's going to be another thing that pharma releases, and they're like, okay, now we can't say anything negative about that too, so this is another one we're going to add that you can lose your license. They're taking away a doctor's freedom to be a doctor.
Right.
Yes, and make autonomous decisions that are in the interest of their patients. Absolutely right.
Right. If they have to look over their shoulder, then they can't be free. I think like House, like the TV show House, like he could think outside the box to find a solution for what ails you, right? And we want doctors like that to really, we hear hero stories all the time about doctors,
yeah,
right? I mean, who've thought outside the box they were able to prescribe something and figure something out and save a person's life, and then became like, now they found a new treatment that was able to save lots of people's lives because they were able to do that.
Right. I had a doctor like that, actually, because I had spinal meningitis when I was a child.
Which is like a death sentence.
Yes, and the doctor treated it before the tests were in because he felt like he couldn't wait. And my dad even said, "Why did you do that when you didn't know?" And those hours did save my life.
Wow.
And he said, "I looked in her eyes and there was no one home, and she used to be a really responsive baby." And so he just knew, so yes, I have benefited from a doctor just like that.
Yeah.
Dr. Hoagland, who I think is retired in the East Bay area.
Well, then you have people like Dr. Peter McCullough who did the same, right? And were able to come up with and prescribe treatments that saved people's lives, but then they were marginalized, cast out, and lost their jobs as a result of doing that.
Yes.
Tragically.
So DeSantis' new bill is set in place in order to protect doctors to make decisions like this, autonomous decisions. And it will have to pass Congress in Florida, but we can pretty much assume it will, because in 2021, he had no problem passing a similar law regarding COVID mandates in the workplace. Now, here's a summary of that bill signed into law in November of 2021. And actually, now that you look back, and we're, over a year past this time frame, November 2021, history has been good to this document. In November of 2021, this was panned as a crazy thing to do, which was prohibit vaccine mandates. Employers who violate employee health protections would be fined. Government entities may not require vaccines. This was, again, a lot of people called Ron DeSantis crazy for doing these things, but none of these measures have proven to actually stop the spread of COVID. So turns out it was quite a logical thing to do. Here is DeSantis on Tuesday discussing how he consistently pushed back against lawmakers who wanted to push COVIDism in Florida.
But I'll tell you, being the free state of Florida did not happen by accident, because it required us over these last few years to stand against major institutions in our society, the bureaucracy, the medical establishment, legacy media, and even the President of the United States, who together were working to impose a biomedical security state on society. They sought to marginalize people who declined COVID jabs by using things like vaccine passports. They sought to prevent people from being able to earn a living if they declined the jab through the Biden employer mandate. They sought to deny children an education if their parents did not want their kids to get mRNA shots. They sought to discriminate against Americans based on vax status by treating them different in their own workplaces. They sought to impose masking requirements on everyone from spectators at sporting events to young school children. And they sought to silence medical practitioners who followed the evidence and backed the science over the narrative. And the fact of the matter is, they had a lot of momentum. They brought a lot of power to these fights, and they would have won, except for the fact Florida said no.
Yeah, he's right. I mean, a lot of those things early in the pandemic.
Wait. What is he right about? Because there's a lot of revisionist history going along lately about DeSantis, and I want to be.
Yes.
We have no dog in this hunt, but we want to be fair and follow the truth. So we're not going to revise history. I'm anti-revisionist history.
Okay, you're right, because he was responsible for a major vaccine rollout.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say that was a major lockdown. Florida had a pretty
sure. I mean, gyms, pastors. There were schools. There were lockdowns, and people forget. Like, Trump let lockdowns up to the states, and they could have had exemptions. Like, DeSantis could have said, "Mr. President, Mr. Trump, we're going to stay wide open."
But Florida went back to school before most places.
They did. I think Georgia ended lockdowns first. So people were saying, oh, DeSantis ended it before everyone else. I believe, if I'm not mistaken on my dates on this,
yes,
Georgia ended it first.
I don't think I'm giving him credit for more than history is allowing. I'm just saying that when you look at this document from November of 2021, and already he was repealing vaccine mandates when vaccine mandates were just getting started in mid-2021, really just picking up steam in order to send kids back to school in the fall. For him to have been able to pass this law, which now history is kind to, is something. So yes, maybe he's taking credit for more than he did at the time.
Can we watch this? Here's an example of this, just so we can. Oh, no, didn't take it. Sorry, guys, didn't take my.
Give me a second.
Yeah. Here's an example of. We're gonna get the video up here in a second, but this is where he was ordering all Floridians on actions on this. This was specifically. Just let me know when we're good to go. There we go. All right, and there we go.
You know, at this point, I think even though there's a lot of places in Florida that have very low infection rates, it makes sense to make this move now. And you know, I did consult with folks in the White House. I did speak with the president about it. He agreed with the approach of focusing on the hot spots, but at the same time, you know, he understood that this is another 30-day situation, and you got to just do what makes the most sense. So that order will be coming out momentarily. It will go into effect tomorrow night at midnight. You know, at this point, I think even though...
So just a few examples of some of these orders being put in place. There's been a lot of, on social media over the past 24 hours, people saying like, there was never any lockdown. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, no, we need to be fair about this. What actually happened in history will show that they, of course, then pulled back and now really going full force to say that we were lied to about a lot of what we were hearing from these medical professionals in the biopharmaceutical complex. So that's fair, where you still have a lot of mandates in place even after we know this data. That's the most troubling thing. So you have government mandates, you have business mandates in other areas, and you have states like Governor DeSantis and governors of Florida saying, wait a second, all of this is now showing that we should be doing the opposite of this.
Yeah, and I brought some charts to sort of compare, if you'd like to. We can get to that in a second, because he may be able to say, based on the grand jury that just approved a board to discover how Big Pharma helped implement these rules in the first place in Florida, because he may be able to say, look, they lied to me. They told me these things. I thought they were true, and I bought it, and so I put these laws in place in Florida. And so now this investigation may show exactly who told who what, and that may give him a tree to bark up, a leg to stand on, I don't know, a cane to stand on. I don't know what the
a rope to piss up.
Sure, yeah.
A rope to piss up.
A pot to be black. I don't know. But it may give him an excuse to say, I went along with COVIDism to a point because of these data points that were presented to me, and then I later found out this, right? And then the hiring of Joe Ladapo, the Surgeon General in Florida, came early on in the pandemic, but after it had really got started. So it proves that he was seeking out alternative voices all along. And so that may be, I'm not trying to promote DeSantis. We're just trying to watch what he's doing because he takes so much flack in the media for doing it. But at the same time, these anti-discriminatory practices now have been shown. They don't stop the spread. They don't really do anything.
Right.
Making people wear masks, not allowing people to go to
they
work.
do a lot though, right? They have a lot of negatives.
Right.
Well, we know what it does to children.
Yeah.
We know what it does to populations. We know what it does to actually, hurting natural immunity.
Yes.
Right, actually getting the flu, as we would say, right, and being able to metabolize that naturally. It does a lot to protect you from not getting that.
Yeah. So you brought an angry tweet.
Yeah, this is Jordan Zakarian, who's a reporter, said this about Governor DeSantis. So there's some angry people here. More people have died of COVID in Florida than in New York, Pennsylvania, and all but 2 other states, he writes. This despite not suffering a wave at the beginning when vaccines weren't available. Only a sicko is fined sacrificing tens of thousands of lives for a doomed presidential bid. Basically saying we won't do any of these lockdowns, and so people will just die.
Right. So it's true that that Florida still has high COVID deaths. And we talked about recently how a doctor on CNN is now saying that COVID deaths may be overreported. So let's put a pin in that.
Yeah, for instance, in Florida, we found out like a motorcycle accident, right? This person was in a motorcycle accident, dying, and they had COVID, right? So he died of COVID. Like that's how they measure these things, right?
Right.
Forget the motorcycle accident. He died of COVID.
I think what this guy is saying that he should not be repealing vaccine mandates and mask mandates because people are dying in Florida. Well, let's sort of juxtapose Florida's death rate with states that did have stricter mask mandates, stricter lockdowns, and stricter vaccine mandates as well. So let's look at Florida versus New York.
Oh, people in the chat are saying, yeah, like look at New York's way worse.
Yeah, and so look at the death rate in New York is on par with Florida. Just I think it's about 10,000 less or something like that, despite being a much smaller state geographically. But if you look at the spike rate, right, these are just death rates that yes, New York had early in the pandemic death spike, and then sort of flattened the curve. So you might be able to make these are deaths, right? And this Florida death spike was in September of 2021, and that seems to have flattened out. So New York may be a case that like, oh, if you're strict with COVID, then you get the result you want. But New Jersey is not really. Look at New Jersey. Early spike, and then some more spikes, and then a big spike around the same time as Florida in the fall of 2021, and then sort of leveled out again, sort of like Florida. Look at Pennsylvania. You know, these things don't seem to go along with mask mandates, lockdowns, and vaccine mandates. They just sort of have their natural spikes and then all seem to be getting around to the same thing, just petering out towards the end of 2022. California, which had strict lockdowns, strict vaccine mandates, again, you know, early spike, and then Florida has its spike later, but all of them are sort of, and so it doesn't seem to make a case that mandates are what is getting out of the pandemic. So I'm not sure what that tweet would otherwise have him do, is leave mandates in place when we know that vaccine mandates have nothing to do with the spread rate.
Right. And by the way, when did Florida, I mean, no one ever dies in Florida, right?
What do you mean?
Like, I'm just being facetious, right? But look, it's an elderly population, a very large elderly population,
yeah,
right? You move to Florida from New York because you're going to live out your days there, and that's where you're going to pass away, right? That's what happens in Florida.
I guess
FYI.
So. My stepmom said that you see a lot of people like ghost cars because it's like little old ladies who you can't see them.
Oh,
like
I lived in Orlando, like driving down I-4. Like, you better watch out. Like, love my Orlando friends, but my God, be careful. Like, be careful on I-4 because you never know what's going to happen, you know? And I was friends with people that worked in the medical establishment down there, and it was, it could be scary. So, yes, people were dying in Florida all the time. And you have a disproportionately high elderly population. When they get the flu, right, that's maybe going to have some problems, especially if they're 85 years old, 82 years old, and they've had other ailments and so forth.
Yes.
So that's going to happen. And then people can point to South Dakota and say, Kristi Noem didn't lock down South Dakota, and you can't really compare the populations. One state is not the same as the other when it comes to this stuff. So I don't know. I think, and obviously these death numbers have been widely skewed as well. And of course, the deaths we knew in New York were widely skewed under Cuomo. So there was a lot of garbage going on.
Yeah, it's just hard to look at these charts and say, okay, that's because of a vaccine, or that's because of school closures, or that's because, there's so many things to interpret here. So I hate to tell you this, but 180 character tweet is not the place to parse out the nuance of COVIDism,
right,
and lockdowns and legislation. So that doesn't work.
Well,
that's why we have a show. This is how I don't get banned from Twitter. Is I don't instigate and provoke with people on Twitter.
Well, that's because
I only really do it here.
280.
Yeah. I instigate and provoke on this platform only, and then personally in my personal life.
Well, someone was provoking me in our chat just a moment ago.
What did they
that's
tell
a bad move. White Goodman says, Redacted is living in 2020. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. Redacted.
Why do you care about that?
I don't know. I don't know what it means. Like redacted is living in 2020 because we're not sitting here apologizing for anything that happened in 2020 or acting as if the policies of 2020 are okay at all. I mean, I watched my dad die as a result of these policies, so you're not going to tell me that we're living in 2020.
Maybe they mean our clothes are out of fashion, which is less offensive to me.
What is?
Maybe they mean our clothes are out of fashion.
Oh, that could be.
Yeah, look at David's shirt.
Well, he's 1967.
So.
No, but I was going to say, I think like the data that we're showing shows that this, like, the point is that they're still promoting it like it's 2020. They're still promoting all of the same things they were promoting back then now. And Florida's like, we're not doing it anymore.
Yeah. So Redacted is not living in 2020.
No.
We're doing a whole story right now on DeSantis sticking it to the biopharmaceutical complex. And by the way, impaneling a grand jury investigation to go after these liars. So we're celebrating that. We're celebrating having these people answer these questions that need to be hauled before a jury and hear these depositions. So
yes, somebody today replied me on Twitter of some Albert Bourla being followed around at Davos. Have you seen that one?
Yeah.
By Rebel News saying we were owed some answers. When did you know this, that, and the other? And he keeps saying, "Have a good day," and he's like, "I'm not going to. We're walking together on the street." I don't think that's how we're gonna get the answers, but I appreciate all efforts towards getting answers.
Oh, man. The World Economic Forum. We're going to have much more coverage on the World Economic Forum a little bit later in the show. Plus, tomorrow, we're going to do a deep dive on a number of these panels because there's been just so much information coming out from the World Economic Forum. We're going to be joined on that tomorrow here on the show. So we've got more news to get to here on this Wednesday. We are going to talk about these globalists and Greta Thunberg being arrested. Was it a staged bunch of theater around climate? And we got a special guest on that. We're also going to look at these gas stoves because the World Economic Forum, we now know, is perhaps one of the big partners behind this move to eliminate gas stoves from your life. The World Economic Forum doing the things, once again, to make the average people suffer while they can fly around in their private jets. But first, it's no secret right now. If you've tuned into this show, you know experts are predicting a recession headed our way. Layoffs are already happening and the government ready to print more money. That's why we're looking at gold right now and further devaluing the U.S. dollar by having gold or silver as a hedge against the declining paper currencies, these fiat currencies. That is one of the smartest plays you can make right now. Last year was terrible for most investors. 2023 could even be worse. That is, unless you were smart and invested in gold. Then you were protected from loss while other investments fell. If the experts are right and we get hit with a recession, 2023 is looking even better for gold and silver investors. And I look at gold and silver as not a huge wealth building mechanism, like the idea that you're going to get wildly rich from it. No, maybe it'll go up nicely and maybe go up, 5, 10, 20%, who knows? But the idea is wealth preservation, because when you have a US dollar in your bank account, you're losing money every day. That dollar loses value every day it's in your bank account because of inflation. So if you're interested in investing in gold, then the folks at Lear Capital will help you. Start purchasing precious metals right now or converting part of your IRA or your 401k into gold and silver IRA. Call Lear Capital today at 1-800-613-3557 or go to LearRedacted.com. There are a lot of gold companies to choose from. And Lear Capital has over 25 years experience, thousands of 5-star reviews, and a risk-free guarantee. It gives you 24 hours to review the purchase before committing to it. Lear Capital is a top choice when buying gold and silver. So call that number on the screen right there if you're interested, 1-800-613-3557 to get your free gold kit, or go to LearRedacted.com to get your free gold and silver investor's guide and receive up to $15,000 in free bonus metals with a qualified purchase. Again, that's LearRedacted.com. What are these climate elites doing to all of us? Are we watching climate elites putting on theater in order to drive their personal agenda? Well, yesterday, climate activist Greta Thunberg showed up at a coal mine in Germany to protest the coal mines being put into production. She was doing this because Germany recently shut down most of its nuclear power plants in a bonehead move. So they're now turning to coal, of course. It makes no sense at all. And she's right about that. But video emerged showing Greta being dragged off by police, and she was, quote unquote, arrested. And then the mainstream media ran that version of the story. Oh my God, she was arrested. She's a martyr. But then a short time later, behind the scenes video emerged showing Greta taking photos with police. So was the whole thing staged? You be the judge. Ralph Schulhammer, though, is an academic researcher, and he's just written an excellent new article in Newsweek titled "Climate Activism Isn't About the Planet, It's About the Boredom of the Bourgeoisie," those elites, the ruling class. So Ralph is the perfect person to talk to about all of this. Perfect timing. You published this piece, Ralph, and literally in the same afternoon, Greta Thunberg is arrested. First of all, your response to seeing that happen, that theater unfold.
No, I think it kind of reinforces what you just said and what I also tried to bring across in my piece, right? That a lot of climate activism is a pastime for the wealthy elite or for the children of the wealthy elite. Maybe that's an even better way to put it. And many of those who are represented in culture, in the media, or kind of to put it in a more general term, those who currently gather in Davos, right? This is exactly kind of the group of people that has certain issues on top of their agenda because it satisfies their own feeling of virtue, their own feeling of importance. But unfortunately, them pursuing their own goals can have devastating effects on those on the lower end of the, whether it's socioeconomically or planet-wide, right? I mean, we talked about this in the past. Kind of a lot of the climate policy is conducted on the shoulders of either slave labor in China or child labor in Africa. So there's a very dark side to this, which gets most of the time ignored because it doesn't fit the narrative.
Right. So pulling out these rare earth minerals that, of course, go into the solar panels, the wind turbines, and all of these things that then have no recycling programs. And we don't ever hear about that side of the story, right?
Yeah. And I mean, it's even more ironic. Just to give you two quick examples, because you mentioned the protests against coal mining in Germany where Greta Thunberg participated. To mine that specific area of land for coal was sanctioned by the German parliament. So this was decided by the German parliament, and the German Green Party is, of course, a member of the governing coalition. And you had this absurd scenario where the same members of parliament of the Green Party who voted for coal mining were then a week later in this German village of Lützerath to protest the very coal mining they approved a few days earlier. Right? That shows you that a lot of this truly is show. And the second example is we know there are, for example, great lithium reserves in the U.S. state of Maine, very close to a very fancy, swanky ski resort where we can assume that many people who can afford to ski there are going to drive a Tesla or any other electric vehicle. But the state of Maine, immediately after they found those reserves, has made a law that lithium mining in the state of Maine will be illegal. Right? And this shows you exactly what's going on. So it's climate virtue for me and lithium mining, rare earth mining for thee.
Right. No, great point. Why do you think they're doing this? Why is the bourgeoisie, are they just bored? And they have nothing else to do? Why do you think that these elites are doing this?
I think that's really the matter that we have to discuss in more detail, that this is not a technical question or a scientific question. This is really a matter of many of those people in power or close to those in power, like, for example, the WEF, Klaus Schwab and others, right? That they found their meaning, their identity, their reason of existence, if you want, in this, as they call it themselves, right? I mean, Klaus Schwab's book is literally titled The Great Reset, right? This idea we have to remake the world at all cost, or to put it differently, not at all cost for them, but very much at all cost for everybody else. I mean, there was this very, ironic story, and we hear this all the time, about the number of private jets that flew into Switzerland, and that apparently escort services had to recruit, new employees, so to speak, to satisfy the extreme demand for sex workers during the time in Davos. So it really has this kind of pre-French revolutionary feeling a little bit, right, where you have this luxuriously living elite that at the same time wants to tell people that, you can't drive your car, you want to visit somebody using a plane because they live further away, maybe you shouldn't do this. And I think there's a lot, or a huge part of this is, you yourself want to live a swanky lifestyle without feeling bad about it. So what you do is you try to ban others from doing it. But this is really a cultural phenomenon, I would argue, much more than a technical phenomenon, or even has anything particularly to do with the climate, because we all know that climate change will be mostly affected in India, in China, and other parts of the world. It's not going to be decided in a coal mine in Germany or in a, electric vehicles in France. That's not going to be the front where this is going to be decided.
And a lot of the pricing now we're seeing is devastating for so many small businesses, for so many average people. Of course, the data, I've covered this on the show last week, the data for a kilowatt hour of electricity, the pricing has surged. Of course, natural gas pricing has surged. Across the board, we're seeing it. Now, Europe, of course, is getting hit with this massive cold snap. So now people are really firing up their heaters in order to stay warm. And so those elites won't feel any of it. They're going to be fine. They'll absorb all of those costs, but it'll be the little people, right? It'll be the proletariat, of course, that can't afford to even turn up their thermostat, put on an extra sweater, they're told to do that. And so this is going to adversely affect them, not the elite.
It's even more absurd. I mean, let's assume, and that's fine by me, like let's assume that we disagree with the methods, but we agree with the goals of, the Greta Thunbergs of the world. Now, if we look at the numbers, it's absolutely clear that the richer people get, the wealthier they get, the more they care about the climate, right? The more they care about environmental issues. So if they would be smart, or if it would really be about the climate and the environment, they would say, let's try to get as many people as possible, as rich as possible, as quickly as possible, because then they're going to care even more about the issues that we care about. But that's not what they do. They do exactly the opposite, right? They say, well, people, then they can't afford certain things, right? Certain lifestyles. We have to eat less meat. We have to travel less. As you said before, right? We have to get used to the fact that you can't to use one recent example, you can't take a hot shower every day. But this is not how you're going to convince people of your agenda. But that's my point. I don't think that the agenda really is what motivates them. I would even go so far to say, if we would go, to the kind of the most outspoken activists and say, so here we have a magic button, and if we hit this magic button, right, we can freeze global climate, below 1.5 degrees. I would suspect that they would say, we cannot push that button, because even if then the climate problem is solved, there is still so much else we have to do, because the system per se is wrong. Capitalism itself has to be, abandoned or changed. So this is really my suspicion, is it's more about a search for identity, which I can find also a little bit into this idea of a transnational identity, right? You identify with the globe and not your nation or your immediate region. And I think this is how we have to have this conversation more and more, that this is an ideology or a culture, if you want, right, that has very, very specific, emotionally held goals or things they want to achieve, but it's more driven by religious fervor and the religious sentiment, and not by a problem-solving attitude. Because, last point, if it would be problem-solving, there are many good news, right? The ozone layer apparently is healing itself over time. The Great Barrier Reef is in much better conditions than we were told it would be a couple of decades ago. So there's a lot of good stuff happening, right? That would kind of should motivate us to say, okay, what can we do to double down on the things that make these good things happen? But that's not their goal, right? It's the idea that you want to preach virtue. It's a little bit like, a new kind of reformation with one difference, right? The early kind of the Martin Luther reformers, at least in many cases, they practiced what they preached. But what makes them worse at the moment is that they preach what you have to do differently, while they themselves don't have to do it. And I think that makes it even worse.
No, hallelujah. That is absolutely spot on. And all of the good things that are happening right now, the Great Barrier Reef, polar bear populations. I mean,
oh yes,
the list is pretty endless right now, but they don't want you to know about that. They want you to suffer while they fly their private jets into Davos. Ralph, always great to see you. There's no one else we'd rather turn to for this context here on this show. And as many eagle-eyed viewers who are watching our show right now will point out, they want to know about your Masters of the Universe figures back there, and someday you and I will have to compare action figures that I've got behind me and your He-Man figures back there.
It's for me, it anchors me, right? I mean, I always say that my interest in politics was awoken by the very idiosyncratic policies of Eternia and the competition between He-Man and Skeletor. But it's more like this, right? For me, it's. I think one of the things that, and this is another conversation I hope we're going to have someday, is of course we have in the past undermined so many sources of meaning, right? Family, religion, the nation, that it's understandable that particularly those who are most affected by this undermining have looked for different things, right? That now for them it's the environmental movement, it's the climate movement, and I think we need to appraise and appreciate the fact that people are looking for meaning in their life. And if we take away certain sources of meaning, they're going to try to find new ones. But the question is, what is the effect of these new sources of meaning? And I'm afraid that the direction which we're currently going, right, for many people will have very negative consequences. And this is worthwhile to point out and to, as much as we can, mobilize against it.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. Whether it's a woke political ideology, which becomes their new religion, or this climate activism, while ignoring how it actually hurts average people, and they wrap themselves in this. Great piece.
Can I just one quick sentence?
Yeah.
And they're all connected, right? If you look at how many of these activists talk now, they all talk about, well, climate is also a problem of decolonization, right? It's also a problem of capitalism. It's also a problem, a consequence of colonialism. So the woke language and the climate activist language is very similar because they are driven by the same motivation, right? It's the search for a source of meaning in life. So it was only a matter of time until those two overlap, and I think this is what we see at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Spot on. Ralph Schulhammer is his name. Read his new work. We'll have it linked up in the description below, the new piece that he just published in Newsweek. Thank you so much for your context on this. Ralph, great to see you so much.
Anytime. Thank you.
And Happy New Year to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you to you as well.
Thanks, Sean. And thanks to all of you, your comments here in the chat. I'm watching them while doing, have this interview. And it's like, so this is just one piece of it, right?
Yeah.
The idea that this is like a religion for these people because they're bored. I mean,
and because society is highly secular. This is something that Michael Schellenberger writes about in his book San Francisco, is the absence of religion has created space for people to embrace woke policy as a replacement for something to cling to.
Yeah, they don't have God in their life. They don't have some meaning, so they cling to this, right? This climate policy or woke politics. So this is how they live their lives.
And they think that they are being increasingly accepting of all lifestyles, because a lot of times it is, of course, well-intentioned, but you don't think about then who you're punching down at.
Right, and this is what Alex Epstein writes about in his book, which is when you have this zero impact policy plan, when you're like, it's the impact policy framework, and so we can't touch the earth. And that's great for all these elites to say, we need to tread more lightly on the earth. Great, that's nice for you in your multi-million-dollar mansion to say that. But when what you're really saying is, hey, all of you folks that live in Africa that rely on hydrocarbons to live your life and power your hospitals, stop using that stuff because I don't like it. I want you to have less impact on the earth.
So to those people, I'll say, oh, are you going to unplug your toothbrush and your mini fridge?
No, you won't. They won't.
No, I'm not going to, but I don't want you
your,
to have those things.
Stop flying in your private jet, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I think
the private jets.
I think part of the problem is
underground bunkers.
Right.
Yes.
Like I remember when I was young, right? So it's like this just proves further that propaganda works, because I became militant about the green movement because they can easily convince you. And I kind of use the example like, you always have new people coming on the internet every day that still don't even know how to like copy and paste. So you have people getting fresh propaganda every day. And so I became militant about that green movement. I was all CFL light bulbs and all this other stuff, but then it just started to fall apart for me because I saw the hypocrisy in it all, and I was like, wait a minute, I'm doing all this. So I think that like it starts out, people have the good intentions for a mission that they believe in because they do honestly feel like they're protecting the earth. But at some point, if it starts to fall apart, and then when it does, you have to embrace that it's changed and not keep going, which is the problem that I have with people that keep going, even when they have more information that proves it not.
Yeah, I think when we walk along the beach, like none of us wants to throw a plastic bag, like put it in the trash can, right? Don't be an idiot, right?
Yeah, we've seen enough sea turtle pictures.
Right. So you don't need to do that. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, but are we talking, so, okay, don't throw that here in this and make a mess, throw it in the trash can. But are so many plastic bags killing our oceans? And the answer is actually no, it's not. It's actually fishing equipment that is falling off of boats that winds up in the ocean. It's not plastic bags. So you need to understand these things and dive deeper into the data on this. And I think you're right. A lot of this starts to unravel. Like, sure, treat the earth great. Like, don't pollute it, right? Don't throw crap out your window when you're driving. And we want a beautiful place to live in, right?
Or if you live in urban cities, don't poop on the sidewalk.
Right.
How about that?
Unlike San Francisco, which that's what they do there in San Francisco.
Michael Schellenberger, again, in Apocalypse Never, has an entire chapter about those turtle dying pictures, or the turtles with the straws in their nose, and how, those are, yes, heartbreaking and gut-wrenching, but when you have to look into the actual incidence of plastic, and there are studies that have done that. So we can't sort of just be like, oh, well, then nobody should use a plastic straw, because of the internet video that I've seen, when the move towards paper straws actually has a higher carbon emission.
You're right. So we see one video of a turtle with a straw up its nose, and then suddenly entire states have banned plastic straws.
And the data shows that the move to plastic bags has increased carbon emissions as well, because paper bags have a higher footprint to produce.
Right. So now we move these stupid paper. I hate paper straws, by the way. They're the worst.
Yeah.
They make that feeling when you fingers on the chalkboard?
Yeah.
Just those touching my lips gives me that feeling. I cannot do paper straws.
Where were we? We had a
thinking about it,
Starbucks
I'm like-
lid that was made of that paper straw material recently. Where was that? And I was like, oh, that's a no. That's an absolute no.
It was in France. I think it was in France.
It was at the Starbucks in Toulouse.
Yeah, it was.
That's
in
where
France,
it was.
Yeah. I'm like, what is going on here now?
It was the whole paper straw was the top, like what would normally be the plastic's top. Have you seen those, Philip, David? No.
No,
we have metal straws. Are the big thing is bars in Portland have metal straws.
Yeah.
That they wash then. So that's like everybody just has reusable metal straws, like spoons, basically.
Yeah, I have those. I've had those for my kids.
Yeah,
I have one in my car.
Yeah. Anyway, stay away from those paper straws. Are the worst. They break down after a few seconds. And if you want to savor your drink, like if you got like a frou-frou drink with some whipped cream or something on it, you want to savor it a little bit.
Yeah.
And then halfway through the drink, the damn thing's broken down.
Yep. I'm not for this.
How meta would it be to shoot spit wads through them, though?
We used to do that in high school. Spitballs.
They could turn into a spitball on their own.
I was an expert.
Exactly.
I used to get the plastic straws from the lunch ladies and bring them, and then I was an expert at the spitball. You got to get them real small.
That's gross. I don't want to hear about that.
The one time across the room, right on.
What did I just say?
Right on Brett's forehead. Bonk.
Can we mute him?
Bonk. It stuck right there as the teacher was calling on him.
I'm not going to tell you again.
You're in the room with him. I can't mute him in your room. I can mute him to the stream, but you'll still hear him.
Funny story, though.
The opposite of what you want. You'd be the only one.
Okay, then I'm just going to do this.
Hold on, one other funny story. So about that, it was fourth grade chemistry class, and Chuck Dvorak, who was the school quarterback, friend of mine, Chuck Dvorak, we sat at the sarcastic table. So he was facing the hallway, and I was facing this way. He was facing the hallway. He had a spitball thing ready to go to fire at me or somebody else, and then he did. And just he had the worst luck. And he was the quarterback. The moment he did this, the high school principal walked right by the door, right as he's firing the spitball, and then he was benched. He wasn't able to play in the next game because of that.
I'm gonna crush some skulls.
It was pretty funny. Bad luck.
You know what that's from? Breakfast Club.
Breakfast Club, yeah. All right.
Crush skulls.
We got more news to get to. We're going to talk about these gas stoves. It goes perfectly with the story we were just talking about on the climate. And not surprisingly, of course, the World Economic Forum is behind this gas stove ban, one of the big partners in that. So we're going to talk about what this actually means, what's the science behind it. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at Moomoo, because right now they are giving away, and by the way, take a look at their beautiful new website, all updated. You can go to redacted.inc/Moomoo and trade like a pro with Moomoo. And they've just added a new feature at Moomoo, which is free free earnings calendar built in, which is amazing. So if you're watching different companies that you want to invest in, different commodities companies, different gold companies, different gold producers, silver producers, uranium producers like I invest in, the people that pull the things out of the ground that we need every day to power our lives. Well, you can now look at their free earnings calendar. So you can see when these companies are going to announce their earnings. It used to be, it was crazy. Like you would literally have to rely on a Facebook group to get this information before. So now they've just added it in totally free. And when you open an account, you get 15 free stocks when you make your initial deposit in the account. You get a free stock for opening the account, and then you get these additional free stocks as you make your initial deposit in the account. That's 15 free stocks. Just go to redacted.inc/moo right now to get 15 free stocks valued up to $30,000. And you can trade like a pro with Moo. I love their apps. It's my favorite way to set alerts and get my news. I get alerts going on throughout the day to see what's happening in the broader economy. All of it. And it's totally free. It's a great app on Apple, on Android, on your Mac, or your PC. Again, check it out, redacted.inc/moo to get 15 free stocks and all of their new bells and whistles in their app. So our thanks to them. All right, it is time, folks. Let's move over to Rumble, because we want to do, because we love Rumble and we want to show them some love. So all of you guys right now, come on over to our Rumble channel. Hopefully you'll join us there. Just go to rumble.com/redacted. I saw a bunch of people saying, we really, really hope you guys will move over fully to Rumble. And we're trying to, and we're going to get there, hopefully. That's the goal. Maybe by the, I don't know, a few more months, we probably want to get there. But again, a censorship-free platform, and we're able to do all these stories on Rumble that we can't do on YouTube. So come on over right now. We're going to end the stream on YouTube. So come on over to rumble.com/redacted and be sure you're subscribed there, and you can watch the stream. Will continue live right there on Rumble.
All right. Bye, YouTubers. We appreciate you.